Hello, everyone. I'm Jean Devine, owner of Garcia Street Books, and I am very pleased to welcome you to our third edition of Literary Soundbites, a virtual platform created to join writers and authors with the potential readership and give folks an opportunity to actually see into an author's process, what an author is about, and what the book is likely to bring to them. I am really particularly pleased with our wonderful guest today, Santa Fe's beloved author, Natalie Goldberg. Natalie is not only beloved, though, in Santa Fe, she's beloved the world over. She spent 40 years as a practicing Zen and teaching the practice of writing in workshops and in many other venues across the world. She has written 15 books. One of her first and early successes was a book that was translated into 19 languages, and it sold over 1 million copies, Writing Down the Bones. Natalie has more than one art that she is proficient and prolific at. And the other art that she talks about is painting. And you can learn more about her life as a painter and her paintings through her book, Living Color, Painting, Writing, and the Bones of Seeing. So that's just a little bit about our guest. And what I'm really excited is to talk about what delights she is going to bring to us today. And she is joined on our little Zoom call by a number of her students. She will be reading from her book, entertaining discussion, and taking questions about her book. This is her very newest one, just released in January, 3 Simple Lines, a writer's pilgrimage into the heart and homeland of haiku. Very exciting topic. Thank you so much for joining us, Natalie.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be in the bookstore. It's really nice rather than being at my desk with Zoom. But I remember the last book, this place was jammed and it was a lot of fun. And, you know, the times are different now. But we still read. Actually, we're reading more, I think, now. And this book came out. You can see it all lined up here. And actually, this cover, I didn't realize the publisher, it's an ancient Japanese image that was done in, I should tell you, of plum blossoms, Kyoto, 1808. So it's very authentic. And the book is about me exploring and explaining haiku because people have odd ideas about it because we were taught it in grammar school, 5-7-5. And it was really an exercise in syllables for the teacher to teach the students. But the haiku is much deeper than that. And I went back to Japan to find the great haiku writers and to find out about their lives and how they lived. And it was in the 17th century mostly. And then it went from there up to the early 19th century. I also discovered a woman haiku writer, a great woman haiku writer, Chione. And my interest was that yes, I'm a serious Zen practitioner, but I'm also a serious writing practitioner. And I knew that in Japan, they didn't limit it to just sitting, that there were other elements of Zen. And I wouldn't say that haiku is a Zen element, but it has the same ardor as Zen. And it has the way of haiku, just like we have the way of Zen. There's the way of haiku, or the way of running, the way of writing, the way of flower arranging. So I wanted to study these haiku writers and see where they came from. And I went back to Japan several times, and I actually went to their graves to honor them and to see where they ended up I mean, everybody ends up being buried or cremated or something, but where? Physically where? Just recently, I went up to in Idaho and visited Hemingway's grave. It's a practice that I do. And my last book, which I don't know if Jean mentioned it or not, it has a tricky title, Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home. I talk about visiting writers and artists' graves. So I'm going to start from page 1. And I should say, this is the first reading I'm doing from this book, and the first time I'm talking about it. So this title of the chapter is called Nothing Less Than God. Haiku is a refuge when the world seems chaotic, when you're lost, frightened, tangled, and nothing is clear. Unaware, the place is famous, a man tilling a field, by Shiki. I read this and cock my head, listening deeper than my pain and confusion. A prominent place, a man doing what's in front of him. I read another, peeling a pear, a trickle of sweet juice along the blade. Shiki again. I smile. I've seen that on the knife many times, and now Shiki has made me conscious of it. Something sexy about it too. A flea bite also, when she is young, is beautiful. Isa. Is it the actual bite, round and pink, that is beautiful, or the young girl who got it? Or is there no difference? An insect bite is elemental. My busy thoughts are settling. My curiosity is piqued. The complicated world is made of simple elements. The evening cool, knowing the bell is tolling our life away. Isa. That bell that strikes at twilight marks another day passing. All these years I heard the big hollow sound in the zendo or in a distant church, and an unnameable emotion rose in me, but I never articulated what it is. Of course, impermanence. Maybe I didn't want to know. One full turn of the sun after another, nothing to grab onto. I moved deeper into the truth of my life. Dear, dear, what a fat, happy face it has, this peony. Isa. So maybe I'll pause here for a minute and let someone ask me a question.
Yeah, Natalie, I'm wondering, what process did you use to select the haikus in your book, particularly these from the great masters and the ones that you wrote?
I only wrote 3 in this book because people think I'm writing haiku. I'm not that much. I'm studying it and studying where it comes from. I picked great haikus. And one of the things I want to say, I'm glad you asked that, Etta, is that the translation really matters. Because you could go pick up a haiku book and it never penetrate because the translations aren't good. So you need really good translations. And I picked ones, haiku, that I really loved. And there's well over 100 haiku in here that I think are really good. I mean, listen to this. Dear, dear, what a fat, happy face it has, this peony. Allen Ginsberg, the poet, first introduced me to haiku. There are 4 great Japanese haiku writers, he declared, holding up a finger for each one as he named them in front of the class in summer 1976. We were at Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado. Basho, Busan, Isa, and Shiki. No women, I thought. Okay, I'd take the boys on and learn what I could from them. Sure, there were some women hidden in history. He also told us that the formal 5 syllables, then 7, then 5, often taught in Western schools, does not necessarily work in English. In Japanese, each syllable counts. They don't have the, and, that, those articles of speech. So he encouraged us not to worry about the count if we write or translate haiku. Only make sure the 3 lines make the mind leap. The only real measure of a haiku, Allen told us that one hot July afternoon, is upon hearing one, your mind experiences a small sensation of space. He paused. I leaned in, breathless, which is nothing less than God. And I never forgot that. And I guess I carried it all these years and read a lot of haiku and always tested them. Do I feel that sensation of space? So is there a question?
Thank you, Natalie, for sharing this book with us, with the world. I have a question, yes. You know, we say that writing, creating, building a book is kind of an act of discovery. So I'm wondering, in writing this book, 3 Simple Lines, what was the most exciting discovery for you, or the most surprising thing you learned while writing?
That's a really good question. And I have to say, I slogged through this book because people read it and they say, oh, I loved it. I read it in one day. I feel like, slow down. It took me at least 3 years to write it. It was hard because there were a lot of different elements. I include 2 trips to Japan in the book, one with a big group and one with 2 friends. I include short biographies of all these haiku writers. I go to a haiku class in Santa Fe and write about it, and I had to make it all work. So it was harder than some of my other books. And the delight is that I did it. And also, I don't know if it was a delight, but to read the biography of Shiki. Shiki was born in the late 19th century and died in 1902 with his foot just in the 20th century. And to read about his life, he had TB, and at 13, he coughed up his first blood. And I write a lot about him, and he died in his early 30s. And I have a photograph of Shiki on my desk because he, in the last years of his life, he was in such pain, he was just in bed. But he had such determination that he dragged himself over to the end of the tatami and spent the day looking out at the garden, waiting for haikus, to receive haikus. So I was very inspired by him, and he had many disciples, and they were all around him when he died. He always knew he was going to die early, but he had such great determination. And really, it's him that handed haiku over to us, who made it modern and made it something that we can relate to. And he's the one that discovered Busan, which is one of the other haiku writers, because Busan was so famous as a painter. It was only Shiki who moved Basho away, moved him over so he could see Busan, because Basho was so lauded and he was so built up that people were frozen. I mean, Basho is a great haiku writer, but they were frozen and they kept trying to imitate him. And you can't imitate and go on. So it was, I think, Shiki and writing and reading about Shiki. But I read a lot of books, a lot of books. And it wasn't easy to find books about some of these people. Shiki, there were, I think, 2. And then 2 books about his biography. In English is what I mean. In Japan, people know about Shiki. And I luckily found, it's out of print, a book about Chione. Japan, they even have a museum for Chione, but we didn't know about her. So that's a good question. And I think about Shiki, it just amazed me. But I could go on. There was so many things. Oh, the other thing that really surprised me was I finished the book, and then about 2 months later, I had an idea that I wanted to write an epilogue. And the epilogue, if you just read the epilogue, has very little to do with the book, with haiku. And I kept thinking, no. And then finally I wrote it and put it together. And when I put it together, it worked. And only then did I realize that this whole book is an homage to Allen Ginsberg. You meet him at the beginning where I read to you that he said that about haiku, and then you really don't meet him again. But I held that all these years. And I did get to know Allen and taught with him after Writing Down the Bones came out. But I didn't realize, sometimes you don't know what you're working on. You have no idea. So it's really an homage to Allen, who actually is the person that brought together for me the idea of writing and the study of mind, which is very important to me. Without that, I don't really care about writing. It has to be a practice, and you have to understand your mind. So maybe I should read a little bit more. Maybe I'll read from Wanting to See. I decide that I have to, I understand I've never read any of this, so I don't know how it sounds. I decided, I have to learn how to write haiku. And I found out there are haiku societies all over the country and haiku conferences. And there's, in Santa Fe, they've been meeting for 7 years, a haiku group, and they met once a month. So this is from the chapter Wanting to See. In between my trips to Japan, I decide to make a concerted effort to write haiku. I hear about a Santa Fe haiku study group that meets at the local library the last Tuesday of every month. They don't count syllables, they're just 3 short lines. Another group I hear about counts syllables and meets in an open field near my house, but with no regularity. I drive to the library at the end of March. It's snowing out, the first and only snow we've had since autumn. But now it's spring and the apricot blossoms, always early, stunning in pale pink, will freeze. The roads are full of slow traffic. Santa Feans are fearful of both snow and rain, and even more of slush. At the library, 11 people, 8 women and 3 men, sit around 3 white tables pushed together. Some look familiar. One man, Charles Trumbull, I already know. He is very experienced in the haiku world, and he is giving us a lesson on Western elements of poetry, metaphor, simile, rhyme, personification. I left these behind long ago in English. Then he calls on a woman with a brown hat to read from the sheet, and he starts talking about wabi-sabi, is the Japanese aesthetics, asymmetrical, a sense of roughness, an intimacy, a closeness. It's different from Western concerns. I move in close. Within the aesthetics is an awareness of the three marks of existence, what Buddhism teaches: impermanence, suffering, and egolessness, an absence of an individual nature. I really am listening. I'm pleased to hear the link between Zen and the essence of haiku. Then Charles also mentions simplicity, respect for natural integrity, and loneliness as a fundamental reality. He tells us the story of how Rikyu, the tea master, conducted his tea ceremony. Not a perfect cup, but one perhaps chipped, unbalanced, not round, so the imperfect truth can enter. We were supposed to each bring in at least 10 copies of one haiku to pass around. But first we go around the room and each of us reads aloud another one we have brought in. I have the one I wrote by the pond the previous summer. On my brown socks, a single black butterfly flaps its wings. This round is a way to warm up. There are to be no comments. We move swiftly from one person to the next and the next, like popping corn. But even that quickly, I can tell that people are at different levels of haiku experience. I surmise that this is a very democratic group. When I read my brown socks haiku, it falls like a dead horse on dead ears. I've had this experience many times before, but mostly when I read prose aloud. It's a great way to measure your work. Now each person takes a turn passing out a single haiku. Cynthia, the woman next to me, economizes and passes out her haiku on the tiniest pieces of paper. She reads it aloud twice. I see her smile in the sun-drenched wild asters. I smile back. A long pause, and then the comments fly. Cynthia, the writer, nods and takes notes. You can take out I see, says the man opposite me. How about changing the first smile to face, says the petite woman in beige linen blouse. You already have one smile. You don't need two. No, I like two smiles. It builds rhythm, says the man who has been gone from the group for 6 months and just returned. Then it is my turn. I pass out what now seems an enormous whole sheet of paper, hand printed in big letters with 3 haiku on it. Which one do you want us to look at? Asks Harriet. I read it twice. Diving into this ice cold pond, my 70th summer. Go for it, I tell my fellow haiku writers. I want to learn. Maybe glacier instead of ice cold to indicate high in the mountains. Glacier has a slower sense, like being 70. Don't spell out the age. Keep it short, comments Sandra, the woman who sends out meeting announcements. She and Charles began the group 5 years ago. They met on Craigslist. Sandra put out a request for haiku writers, and Charles was the only one who initially responded. I nod, I take notes, imitating the person before me who took notes. I like this group. I also want to scream, but I decide to continue with the practice to see where it leads. I'm remembering that first meeting. I didn't know if I was, this book, I didn't know what it was about until near the very end. I just kept working. I couldn't admit to myself I didn't know what it was about because I might quit. And I couldn't admit to anybody else. I just kept working. And then maybe 3 months before the end, suddenly I wove it like a braid all together. So I tried different things. And one of it was trying to learn to write haiku. And so it goes on. With that group, I went for a year. And actually, I still go. It's a wonderful group. So is there another question?
When you talk about writing with the haiku group, I loved the way that you said, eventually what I began to enjoy most is simply not knowing how to do it. I haul in my haiku every month and they usually land like lead. I like not being good, not having a clue. And that brought me back to the cover of the book, which I love so much, and your choice of the word pilgrimage. And it reminded me of an article that we read together once about pilgrimage and about travel as pilgrimage, that talked about also stepping into the unknowing, that a pilgrimage implies unknowing to me. So I was wondering if those two things, I felt like in reading the book that I was on a journey with you to a place that we were discovering together. Oh, and I'm wondering if that was intentional, if when you structured the book, you intended to bring us along with a sense of unknowing, and that we were together exploring something.
Oh, that's a good question. No, as a writer, I'm just fighting to stay alive. I'm fighting. Writing is really the act of seduction. So I want the reader to pay attention and to come along with me, to be quite honest. And so if you think it's a pilgrimage that I took you on, great. I mean, I'm being very honest. I just wanted to put it together so it worked. Yeah. And I wanted you to want to keep turning the page. And I really wanted to share haiku because people don't know about it and how really great and deep it is. And yeah, it was fun to go to that group and not be the leader, to be the dumbest person there. Maybe I'll read a little from that where you, and I didn't even know if they knew who I was, which was really fun. They just treated me like a regular person. And I kept saying, well, I'm trying to learn. And this was a whole year. And they'd come up afterwards and whisper to me, well, you have to read a lot of haiku. You have to write a lot of haiku. And I thought, this is exactly what I tell my writing students. So maybe I'll read from another part. What you want to see. My first trip in this book, I've been to Japan many times, but the first trip in this book, I want to find Busan's grave. And Mitsue was with me, and she's throughout the book, and hopefully she'll ask a question so you can get to see her. So the day before I'm leaving Japan, I'm determined to find Busan's grave. The day before we leave Japan, I head out to find Busan's grave. This is not like visiting the imperial castle or a famous landmark. It's in a quiet, remote temple at the edge of Kyoto. I asked directions from the concierge at the Hyatt, who writes and speaks passable English. Her answer is clear enough, but I can't keep track of all the details. I hand her my notebook. Please write down which bus, when, and what corner. Hi, she writes for a minute and hands the notebook back to me. I dart out the lobby door and walk to the distant bus stop. I wait 15 minutes until the bus arrives. As I get on, I hand the bus driver my written directions. He nods and smiles. I have an uneasy feeling that this does not mean anything. I sit behind the driver. We pull away. In a few minutes, the Hyatt, my one and only landmark, is gone. Are we even going in the right direction? After 20 minutes, I thrust the open notebook in the driver's face again. He smiles and nods again. I understand what this means. I am already lost. I jump off at the next stop. Thousands of wires hum overhead. What do I do next? People in dark clothes walk by briskly. Low buildings with no signs run along both sides of the street. Dark clouds churn above. Slow drops of rain dot the sidewalk. I see a cab. At least I think it's one. An old New York instinct makes me shoot out my hand. The car pulls over in front of me. The rear passenger door opens automatically. The cab driver is wearing white gloves. I lean over from the back seat and show him the directions. He grimaces and shakes his head. I try with my most Japanese accent. Kumbukachi, Busan, Mount Hiei. Naming the mountain rings a bell. The driver's expression changes and we head out. The cab weaves from one street to another. At the base of one of Mount Hiei's foothills, there are fewer people and less traffic. We turn a corner and head up a hill. Facing us is a high wall with bright red Japanese maples peeking over. Then there is an open temple gate. I'm excited. The cab driver is excited too that he found the temple. I give him a handful of bills and dash out. Then I stop. This is a big moment. I try to compose myself. This is why I came to Japan. I close my eyes. I have made it here. I will meet Busan. I will thank him for that haiku I read so long ago and for continuing Basho's lineage in his unique way. And I'll tell you the haiku, which I talk about earlier in the book. I guess this book is all woven together. I read it at Ojo Caliente in the early 80s. This haiku, and I never forgot it. Oh, pain and sadness. The fishing line trembles in the autumn breeze. Oh, pain and sadness. The fishing line trembles in the autumn breeze. I hope you can all feel that leap in the mind and how it's the essence of haiku, paying attention to the fishing line trembling and that being what you use as the subject for a haiku, or really any writing, but here we're talking about haiku. So, Doug, you want to ask a question?
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the book. It just melted me. I thought it was just really beautiful.
Thank you.
And it made me wonder just the way of haiku. And I think at the end of that chapter, you go to Busan's grave. You said his disciples were buried there, or students.
Yeah.
Do you know was there a training in that, or do you know what that was like to be a disciple or student? And I wonder too, if you could pick one, would there be one you would have been a student of?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the training is writing haiku and studying haiku. And then they would all come together and write haiku together and drink sake and, sort of like we do in writing groups. Go, write 10 haiku. Go, write a haiku. And everybody would write. And then they would read them to each other. And they, as I talk about in the book, they reconstructed Busan and his disciples, his friends really, reconstructed Basho's hut. And they vowed that once a year, they would come for a weekend, drink sake, and write haiku together. Okay. So can't you imagine? I'll get buried because I'm probably older than all of you. And I hope you all get buried around me. Wouldn't that be nice? We'd all be together in some other dimension. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes. And is there one, if you could have picked one to study with, to be a disciple?
Yeah. Oh, that is a really good question. Oh, God. Well, the male haiku writers are pretty tough. And they didn't accept women. But in the best world, I think I've come, I don't want to bother Shiki. He has enough to deal with. And Isa, if you read about Isa, he had a pretty hard life. I think I would like to study with Basho because he was the original person that created haiku, the idea of haiku. There was a longer form, and the haiku was the beginning of that form, and Basho made it a separate form. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, he did long journeys into the deep north. He wrote a journal called Journey to the Deep North. There are many translations of it, where he would put a pack on his back and just go. And deep north sort of indicates where it's very wild and undomesticated and uncivilized and cold. And he'd go deep in there with a pack and wander and write haiku and visit places. And he usually went with one other person. And I think I would like to be with him because he began it. You know, he was the originator. And so I honor that. I think he'd be really tough.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I just opened and here's Mitsue. I'll read a little. And Mitsue, I hope you're still here. Yeah, you are. Good. I grab Mitsue by the arm. I desperately need her to translate. I was always having her translate for me. I want very much to communicate with this man who traveled, who's in his 80s and traveled to Kyoto. He'd read Writing Down the Bones in translation. The four of us sit at a round table and order tea. Harada and Ida wave away the food menu. We stare at each other in amazement. Harada cannot believe the author is here in the flesh. I had no idea this meeting was even going to happen. Harada leans across the table and hands me something. A present, he says. It's a fan with calligraphy on it and a card with an image of Ikkyu, a wild 16th century poet and Zen master. You write English very well, it was written on the fan. I bow my head, putting the fan to my forehead. I am embarrassed that I don't speak even a few words of Japanese. Through Mitsue, he asked me, did you teach high school? Yes, I tell him, long ago. I learned that before he became a monk, Harada was a public school teacher, and Ida was one of his students. They have continued to be friends. Then he tells me that he is writing a book, and Ida's press will publish it. Both men pull out their copies of Writing Down Their Bones in Japanese. Ida's copy has many yellow tabs. You have caught Katagiri's teachings, Harada says. It turns out Harada was best friends with Katagiri Roshi. So when he read the book, he was amazed that Katagiri was in the book. Ida leans over his notes. How did you become spontaneous? This seems to be a searching, personal question for Ida. I've never been asked anything like that before. It is also a question I have never asked myself. To my American mind, the question itself is an obvious contradiction. I throw up my hands and tell him, from being Jewish. I'm half joking and half serious. I add, Katagiri too was spontaneous. Harada hits the heel of his hand playfully on his head. I tell him he not free. This he pronounces without translation and pokes at Ida's side. The waitress comes back. Do you want anything else? I shake my head. What is United States? I hear 280 Zen priests there. He tilts his head as Mitsue translates my answer. He adds, doesn't matter, only important, one-to-one with teacher. All of Katagiri's students had that opportunity for intimacy with him, but had to show up for it. That was the trick, showing up. Not easy at 5 a.m. every morning. His consistency is what planted such a deep commitment in many of us. Ida asks another question. It's about something I wrote in Bones, but he can't find it, and he shuffles. I'm going to just move down a little. Oh, they ask us if we want to go out for dinner with them, and Mitsue says no, because we've already been 2 hours, and Mitsue is exhausted from going back and forth between English and Japanese. And so Harada said, I say no as well. Without Mitsue, we can't talk to each other. Plus, I need time to take this all in. As we stand up, he repeats 3 times. And here his English is perfectly clear. Katagiri was very lucky to meet you. Katagiri was very lucky to meet you. Each time he nods his head. Katagiri was very lucky to meet you. And then it goes on. I see that I have things that I took out that I don't, because it's still fresh for me. There are things I took out that I don't realize. He followed me up the stairs to my room and said, Katagiri was very lucky to meet you. And then we bowed. And, you know, it was amazing to me because I always felt I was very lucky to meet Katagiri. Very honored. Mitsue, why don't you ask a question? And so people can see you. I know you're shy, but ask a question. And by the way, Mitsue took the photo of me in the back of the book.
Yeah, which I really appreciate. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Let's see. By reading a book, I was very amazed. Especially the part that I was with you, Natalie. I felt that it's a pleasure to re-experience it, but at the same time, the experience was so deep. So I'm wondering how you could do that. I mean, because that's your art and that's your practice, you said. But there's so much details that you observe, but also you are seeing the essence of the experience itself, and it's almost as there's enough detail for me to re-experience or for the readers to experience what happened. But at the same time, you see through the core part of the experience. I'm really amazed, and then wanted to know how you do that.
Well, well, it's detail. Detail is everything. And if I can put the detail, you feel the root, you feel the essence. And that's a good question. I hope that happens, but I can't always depend on it. But this was such a deep experience for me. And I want to tell everyone, by the way, that Harada and I communicated. We did email, and Mitsue would translate and send back and forth. And he was very excited to get the book, but he doesn't speak English. And Mitsue and I couldn't believe it. He knew all about the book. He wrote back and said, oh, Mitsue, you worked so hard translating, and Mitsue this, and Natalie, and he told the whole story of the book. And Mitsue and I were laughing and saying, he doesn't speak English. How does he know it? And Mitsue wrote me and he said one thing that was wonderful. He said, and tell me if I'm wrong how I got it, Mitsue. I can read what I cannot read. Isn't that what he said?
or actually in the literal, he said, I'm reading what I cannot read, or I'm not capable to read.
I'm reading what I'm not capable of reading. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. 読めないものを読んでいる, he said, and then it sounds like a very it's a contradict itself, but it's almost like a koan. Yeah, but it's amazing. He feels like because he just received, he's so good at picking up the energy, and then that was almost the beyond the word. So by picking up some of the language, using the dictionary, he could really receive what you are writing.
Yeah, he picked up the essence. And
yeah.
And Mitsue, I don't know if I really answered your question about essence. I just work. I mean, I would be too self-conscious if I thought I've got to find the essence. But I feel the experience and I write about it using detail. And I keep it really simple. And some of the details I didn't remember. I wrote when I traveled with Armalie Mattis and Alastair Smith, the second half of the book, we traveled together, and I would write to them sometimes and say, what was that? What did we do? What did it look like? And so they helped me. So it's sort of a communal book.
Natalie, thank you so much for writing this book, and it's been a wonderful experience for me. And what it brought up, and I'm surprised I haven't asked you about it before, is how you decide that this is the topic. Everything comes from your experience because it's mostly memoir, but you have such a rich life, and yet you're so prolific in so many different aspects of it. Like for instance, let's stay on this book, when did you know that you wanted to write about haiku writers and haiku? What helped you get there?
That's a really, really good question. Okay, I came home from the first trip that I write about in here, that I went with Upaya Zen Center, and there were 26 people on the trip, and I came home and just started writing practice. I just started writing the stuff. Yeah, I just wrote about 26 pages. And then I got cancer. And so I left it behind. And while I had cancer, I wrote a book called The Great Spring, which is essays. And then when I knew I was going to be okay, I found out that the blood test had turned and I was going to be okay. Then I wrote that long title that I never can remember. Oh, Let the Whole Thundering World Come Home. But I remembered I had written some pages of the haiku, and I didn't, and I thought, do I have to write that too? I'm tired. And I thought, okay, I'm going to read what I wrote, and I hope it's not good, because if it's not good, I don't have to write that book. And I read the few pages and I thought, oh, there's a lot of energy here. I have to write this book. And I consider this book the third in my cancer trilogy. Even though I mentioned cancer, I think once in here. I think of it as my third book in the cancer trilogy, because it's sort of like, well, too bad, cancer. I got to write that book. I got to write the one that you stepped in and stopped me. I got to write it. I don't want to sound too arrogant, believe me. But so I consider it the third in the cancer trilogy, personally. Nobody else would understand that. But where do I get the ideas? What's interesting, particularly interesting, Sonia, is writing practice it just opened a vein, and I kept writing and had lots of things I wanted to say after a childhood of silence. But after writing this book, and then COVID came, and I was trying to semi-retire, I have nothing to write about. I mean, I can write and I'm looking, but I realized how lucky I was that book after book came through me. Sometimes I finished a book and a week later I started another one. I didn't realize how lucky, what a gift that was. I feel that now because, I have things I can write about, but there's not that blood rush of I have to do it.
Yeah, that's it. That's the other thing. Like, how much passionate do you have to be, or how much interest, or so that you don't get tossed away, so that you keep going. I mean, how can, and do you have various, you just pick things from your, I mean, it all comes from the writing. So you might be writing about many different things in your writing practice, but that's where it's starting to bubble, right? Or
yeah, except that it's always, as I'm writing one book, I have an idea for another book. And I always say, you have to wait to finish this one. But when I did this one, I didn't have any other ideas. But you know what gave me a lot of juice? I had a very deep belief in my training in Zen that you walk your talk, like Katagiri practiced, my Zen teacher. He was always there, whether I was or not. He was in the Zendo practicing. So I always felt that I had to keep writing books and keep writing to show you, to be an example, that I didn't have a right to teach if I wasn't writing. And I know a lot of writers who have written a few good books and then they teach and stop writing. And I've always, and what happens is they get very critical of themselves and then they project it on the students. So when I kept working on books, I was broken all the time. So when I taught, I wasn't very critical. I really accepted where everybody was. So in a way, I did it for you. That's what made me burn. Yeah. And now that I was semi-retiring, I thought, I know about writing, but we'll see.
We'll see.
I miss it. I miss having a deep subject to dive into.
And you really don't have it now, right? I mean, this week.
No, I had one. I thought I would write about my hate of the internet, but I did spend 2 months writing about it, but it felt like it needed more than just I hate the internet. And also I was writing about something I knew nothing about. I do hate it, but I feel like it's a chapter in something else.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for writing for
my friend Eddie said, I was telling him that I didn't know, it's really hard. And he said, well, welcome, Natalie. Now you know how all of us feel. But I miss it. I miss having something to work on regularly. So I've been painting a lot. Mm-hmm. And maybe in the silence of paint, something will come up. And maybe I can rest a little. I doubt it.
The novel.
That was a great question, Sonia. Thank you.
Jean.
Thank you.
Natalie,
yes.
Bernd has a question.
Oh, Bernd.
He's been raising his hand.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes.
Okay.
No, not really a question really in that sense. But first, I want to thank you for that book, which we read aloud, and it's a joy. Also, your voice comes through that somehow, which is surprising and fantastic. So thank you. And by the way, we are very close to Husserl's grave place here. It's 5 minutes. So it's also related in that sense nicely. And you mentioned earlier, if it would be nice to get buried together maybe at some point. Maybe. But my suggestion would be, before that, maybe why not doing another pilgrimage to Japan?
Okay, well, we could think about that. And by the way, in the acknowledgements, I give you the information to contact Mitsue and Bairn, who do beautiful tours of Japan, whatever you want, small tours, and also Germany, and I'm hoping to go sometime.
Oh, would be good.
Art. They show art in Germany, museums and stuff.
Yeah,
So
we appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And then we had it one design, and then, you know, since you said that you will include it in your book, we wanted to have it little in different ways. So it's under reconstruction now, but you know, it will be up. The page will be, and then really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
So it's so nice to see all of you. I wish we could all be together. I really don't like this. I mean, you know, I'm thankful, I guess, that we have Zoom or whatever this is, but, you know, it's not the juice of human beings being together. Everyone, listen to me. Don't forget that. Don't let the internet substitute for real life. Right now we have to because of COVID, but please, everybody take care of themselves. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Garcia Street and Jean, for this opportunity.
Our pleasure, Natalie. It's been a pleasure to have you, as it always is. And thank you for making the time, and thank you for all of your students for making the time to be a part of this. It made it so much richer for everyone who will be watching it in the future. So have a great night, everyone, and thank you so very much.